How's it going? So, as the title implies above, going to be doing a little Python learning tonight. Starting with the basics. So if you've ever wanted, and there weren't already enough things out there, and you think tonight is the night where I am going to sit down and learn me some Python, cool. Hopefully you're tuning in, checking this out, because that is what we'll be doing. Give me just a second to get started here. Alright. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Alright, well, here we go. So, I'm not going to cover how to install Python. You're going to have to get that on your own. So you're going to need to start with Python already installed. So if you're on Linux or you're on a Mac, you're in luck because you've already got it. You're ahead of the curve. So, those of you on Windows, go watch one of the countless numbers of tutorials or whatever on getting Python installed. And then I'm going to be using PyCharm tonight. So PyCharm is a graphical interface for coding Python. You don't have to use that. You can use anything you want. You could use just a plain text editor. I just happen to like PyCharm. You can get the community edition for free. Just go to the PyCharm website. I believe that website to be probably pycharm.com. I don't know. Let's see. jetbrains.com/pycharm. Anyway, download the community edition. It's free. You can install it. If you don't want to do that, just use a plain text editor. That's fine. I'm going to call this project Back to Basics. I'm going to start with a new Python file. And I'm just going to call it Intro. And we're going to be testing these on the command line. And so the first line, especially if you're on a Linux or Mac system, is you want to put this is called the shebang. Oh, gotta spell it right. So this first line, it's a special little line, and it will tell our our system. Come on, terminal. Open up, buddy. There we go. So what we just did right there is the chmod plus x intro.py. That makes our file executable. So if we look in there, we can see our permissions are read, write, execute, read, and execute. And so that's for the user, the group, and everyone else. So that means we can hit /intro.py and nothing will happen because there's nothing in the file. But if we want to go ahead and write our very first program, we're going to print hello world. Alright. And so now when we run that same thing again, alright, we got hello world. So back to that line number 1. User bin env. Env is a command on your Linux and Unix file systems that will look in your environment, boom, all of those places, and it will look for Python, and whatever Python is loaded. When you do that, it's going to use the path to that Python. So here we have, I created a virtual environment, and it's going to use this Python executable whenever we run the Python command. What's a virtual environment? We don't need to worry about that today because this is the basics. So far, we've got our very first program. This thing doesn't do anything except print hello world to the console, but it works. Yay, hello world. That's not super useful. So, what else can we do? A lot of times we need variables. So what's a variable? Well, it's a placeholder. So if I have, let's say I'm going to count how many dogs there are. I'm going to name the variable dogs and say that it equals raw input. How many dogs you got? Now, what this is going to do is we're going to print hello world, and then when we run this, it's going to ask us a question. It's going to pop up to the screen, it's going to wait, and it's going to ask us how many dogs you got. And it's going to hold that value here in this dogs variable. Now, because we're putting this in as a string, this is going to be probably a type string. Let's see. So raw input, this is a built-in command in Python that will prompt the user for input. Type is another built-in command in Python. It's very special. It does all kinds of cool stuff. But we're not going to get into all of that right now. Suffice it to say, it's going to print the type of variable that dogs is. And then we're going to exit. So let's try that and see what happens. Got 3 dogs. And, as I was saying, it's a string. Now let's put a little space there, because you see when it popped up the question, how many dogs you got, there was no space for me to answer the question. So we're going to add a little space there so that next time it asks us, there will be space in between the question it asked me and where my answer is going to go. See there? We've got our space now. How many dogs you got? Let's put in 10. Still a string. Why is it a string? Raw input takes what you've put from the command line and makes it a string. Now, let's see what happens if we want to add 1 to whatever number we put in up here. So let's print dogs plus 1, right? So if we put in 10, dogs plus 1 should print 11, right? Let's see. We have 10. Type error. Cannot concatenate string and int. So we cannot add a string plus an int. If we want to get that number, we need to convert dogs to an integer from a string. So let's do that. It's another built-in in Python that will take and convert, if it can, our string into an integer. Let's try that again and see what happens. Got 10 dogs. Oh, there we go. But what happens if we spell 10? Let's try it. This time we have 10. Can't do that. So, if you're expecting something to be a number or a string or whatever, you need to ensure that, right? We'll cover how to do that later. But now we know how to convert a string number, as long as we type it as a number, into the actual number we want, 1. So there's our 2, right? Still not super useful. Now, let's stick with this just being a number. So we have 10. Let's go with the smaller number, 3. So we've got 3 dogs. Now let's say we want to name them. Well, we can't. Well, we can. Let's say their names are Max, Oreo, and I don't know, Fluffy. So let's print out the dogs' names. This is going to work just like Hello World. We hope, right? Max, Oreo, and Fluffy. There we go. But we've got these 3 dogs, and you know, what if we only want to print the second dog's name? How are we going to do that? Well, with this string, that's not super useful. That's kind of a bad variable for that particular kind of information. So Python gives us another thing called lists. So let's convert this into a list. The way we do that is we use some brackets. Now the way we have this written right now, we have one list with all 3 dogs' names in it. And let's see if that's what happens. Sure enough, down here when we print, we have a list with one thing in it. So what we need to do so that all three dogs have a unique entry in our list is we're going to wrap each one's name in quotes, just like so. And so if you notice here, there's a single quote and a single quote, and this is the value of that list, what's between those quotes. Now let's do this again and see how that variable changes. I'm going to get rid of this hello world so it's out of there. So now we can see there's a set of single quotes, and we have a value for Max, a comma, then we have another set of quotes and a value for Oreo, comma, another set of quotes and a value for Fluffy. So I'm going to change this back to show you an example of how we know that the dog's names in the original list was just one item. Max, Oreo, and Fluffy. We're going to use another one of those built-in commands with Python called len, which is short for length. So let's run this and see what happens. 1. Awesome. So there was one item in that list. Now let's do that again with our modified list. 3. There we go. So now we have a list with 3 items in it. And we know that because it says so, because the length is 3 items long. So let's leave that len there. So what if we want to print the first dog's name only? How would we do that? Well, in computer science, your lists, well, numbers in general start with 0, not 1, right? And so if we want to access the first item in a list, we need to start with the 0th item. But let's see what happens if we try and do what's kind of intuitive, right? So you might think this is the syntax, right? So that we can print our list, and then we want the first item, right? Let's see if that works, because that seems like it would be 1, 2, and 3, right? But let's just see what happens when we do that. So we're expecting Max to print. But it did not print that, it printed Oreo. And that is because computers start counting at 0. So if we change that 1 to a 0 and try this again, we print Max. Neato. Neato burrito. Now, let's go and make our dog example to where we print all the dog's name on a line. So we're going to move into loops, right? So Python gives us a couple of different ways to loop. We have while, or we have for. So in this example, I think it's best to use for. So for dog, here we're going to name what we want each one of these variables to be. So we're going to loop through this list one item at a time, and as we're doing that, we want this value to be dog. So here where we've said dogs equals 3, dog is going to equal Max, then dog will equal Oreo, then dog will equal Fluffy. So for dog, in dog's names, we're going to do something. So we put a colon there. Next, we're going to print out I have a dog named something, right? And that's a little placeholder for something, right? We're going to hit Format. This is another built-in Python thing. And remember, I said that as we're looping through this thing, dog is going to be assigned to each one of these items. So, let's see what happens when we run this. What do you think is going to happen? What we want is, I have a dog named Max. I have a dog named Oreo. I have a dog named Fluffy. Boom, we have 3 dogs. I have a dog named Max, dog named Oreo, and a dog named Fluffy. Did exactly what we wanted. Our dogs get are different ages though, right? We don't just have, you know, the dog. There's multiple things, right, about a dog. Maybe what color is it, what kind is it, how old is it. But we can't fit all that information into a list. So does Python give us other options for that? It sure does. The most basic of which is going to be called a dictionary. A lot of times you'll see dictionaries named with DICT in them, and that's short for dictionary. Sometimes you don't. It doesn't really matter. You can name these whatever you want. I like to keep these things where it's kind of easy to read. So when you look back through later, you know, you don't have to spend a lot of time digging. Later on, if you use this variable further down in a program somewhere, and it's not working like a dictionary should, you know, it's time to go dig where it's defined to see if it's being defined correctly. Just kind of helps out later. So the syntax to define a dictionary is curly braces, and these are key value. So let's just sign something basic. We'll start with something basic. We'll have a string as our key, and we'll have an integer for our value for the age. And so we'll start with Max as the keyword for 1. And then Max's value is, let's say he's a year old. The next dictionary item we want is Oreo. And let's say Oreo's a little older. Oreo's 5. But Fluffy was the very first one you got. And Fluffy is 8. Now, when we run this, the exact same thing is going to happen because we haven't tried to iterate through our dictionary yet. How do we iterate through a dictionary? It's different than a list, right? There's more than one thing. We can't just loop through it. Let's see what happens if we try and do the same thing. Right? So for dog, in dog's dict, let's do something. We'll print dog info. Well, what's going to happen? We're going to format dog, just like we did a minute ago. And you see I'm using the same variable name here. This variable in a loop is scoped to this loop. So at the end of this loop, this is a whole new variable. The information that was stored here is gone at the end of that loop. Let's show you. See, in my IDE here, it's already barking at me. Dog may not be defined. But let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. Ooh, Python held on to that. I didn't think it did that. Makes sense. Sort of. Alright. Oh, it says it may not have been defined. Interesting. I wonder... Okay. I didn't expect it to do that. But on to the dictionary. So we've got our dog info here, and all it printed was their name. We didn't get the age. And that's because we have to iterate the items of a dictionary. So remember I said they have a key and a value, and so you've got to go through it and iterate through it, like to get the key. So we need to assign something to the key, which is max, and then something to the value. Alright, so we have, in this case, it's going to be dog name and dog age, right? But this isn't going to work because we have to iterate, right? But let's see what happens when we do this. We need to add another placeholder. And, whoops. Alright, so now we're going to loop through this. Let's see what happens. Whoa, too many values to unpack, right? So that means we haven't iterated through the dictionary. When we first try and loop through it, it treats it like a list and just takes the first item of each of the dictionary and treats that like a list. But what are the possibilities? How do we iterate? Well, if you don't know how to use a particular piece, a particular variable or something, piece of data within Python, we can use that. We can use another built-in called dir. And so we've got our dog dictionary. And we're going to comment this out for right now so that we can just see what this prints out. Whoa, lots of output. So what this tells us, these are all the functions in a list that you can do. So see, we've got a list item here that it printed out. And so these are all the functions that you can do to this variable. And so all these with the double underscores, we're just going to ignore those for right now. We're going to focus on the ones that don't. So clear, copy, from keys, get, has key, items, iter keys, iter values, keys, pop item, set default, update, values, view items, view keys, and view values. So remember I was saying we needed to use iter items because we want to go through each one. So let's try that. So we'll comment that out. And so I don't think I covered what a comment is, but if your line starts with this pound key, it's a comment. The computer will just kind of ignore it, buzz right on past it. Alright, so now we want to use iter items. So now we've got dog name, dog age in the dogs dictionary, and we want to iterate those items. So let's see if this works the way we want. Let's change dog info to dog name. And then let's put a new line. That's what that character there means. And we'll have dog age. And then after that, let's print one more new line so that there's a blank line between each thing that prints, right? So we'll get dog name on a new line, dog age, and then we'll get a blank space before it prints the next round. So let's see. Sure enough, start there, dog name Max, dog age 1, dog name Fluffy, dog age 8, dog name Oreo, dog age 5. And you'll notice that that's out of order, right? We've got Max, Oreo, Fluffy, not Max, Fluffy, Oreo. Why did that happen? Well, dictionaries are unordered. So the order in which you put them in, it doesn't guarantee that that's how it's going to go when you print it out. Okay? And it doesn't really matter that that's the way that they work, because the way you typically access this stuff is through the key value, right? So let's take a look at an example for that. So I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to comment out this other one. Comment that out too. All right. And let's just focus on our dog dictionary for right now. So we've got the dog dictionary, and we're using that list syntax. Now let's say we want to print how old is Max. Let's run that and see. There we go. That'll print us out the value of that key. Now, since all three of our values are integers, let's see if we can add these. So let's take that. Dogs. And we'll get Oreo. And let's add Fluffy to it. So we're hoping this is going to print 14, right? Let's see. And it does. There we go. Neat stuff. So there's a basic variable, a basic list, and a basic dictionary, and how to use each one. Alright, let's see. let's talk about functions. Because this is all well and good, but this is a lot of typing, and we can't really reuse any of this stuff, right? So let's just delete it. So let's talk about what a function is. A function is going to be a block of code that does something that we can reuse over and over. So let's stick with our dog example where we asked how many dogs we had, right? So to define a function, we need to use the keyword def and then give the function a name. So let's call this one get dog name, or get dog get number of dogs. Right, and so when we do this, that is the basic syntax. Oops. So this is the most basic function you could write. Just pass do nothing, right? When this function gets called, do nothing. That's another special word. All right, but we want it to do something. So what do we want it to do? We want it to return an integer, raw input, how many dogs do you have? So now let's use that. And let's assign that to a variable. Number of dogs equals get number of dogs. And then we shall print the number of dogs that we have. How many dogs do you have? 10. 10. Now, how do we know that it's an integer? Well, we did wrap it in this, but we can also print the type. Remember, we used that earlier to find out what type of data we had. Found out we had a string above. So let's see. We have 10. Yep, got an integer. So there we go. Now, how is that useful? I don't know yet. Let's keep building on our dog example, though. So, we learned about a variable, we learned about a list and a dictionary, and we said that your dog could have a lot of different properties, right? Like it could have its name and its age and what color it is and how many legs does it have, because I think we've all seen a three-legged dog before. What kind of food does it like to eat? Is it a big dog? Is it a little dog? How much does it weigh? All these different kind of things that you can think of about your dog. Is it long hair? Is it short hair? How would we store that? Well, out of the variables we've talked about, probably the best choice is a dictionary, right? But how would that dictionary look? I think it would get pretty complicated. Let's look. dog Dick. And remember, it's going to have braces. So I'm going to go ahead and do this on a new line. And so we're going to have our first dog, right? Dog number 1. And it'll have a value. And the value could be anything. And so since we talked about a dog could have a name and all these different properties, I think we're going to need another dictionary. So, whoops, it's going to need a name. And that first dog's name is Max. And it's got a weight. And maybe that's 150 pounds. And he's a big dog. It's a bull mastiff. Let's say dog's age. And are we going to do months or years? Because maybe there's a puppy. Right? So we need to define and keep this consistent across the dictionary so that we can use it later. Whether we're on item number 1, item number 10, we want the key names to be consistent, or else things could get confusing if we try and access this dictionary by the values, right? So let's say that it's age in months. And let's say that dog is 18 months old. Still kind of a puppy. And he's got a color. What color is he? He's a brown dog. And is he an inside dog or an outside dog? He's an inside dog. What other stuff could we define? This could go on. All kinds of different stuff. Hair length. Right. Short. Get the picture? Yeah. So now we want to add our second dog. See, this is already getting long and ugly. Right? How can you imagine if you've got a pet store and you're trying to keep track of dogs? Can you 100 dogs or something in your inventory? Even 50 dogs in your inventory, and that gets to be a pretty ugly dictionary, hard to manage, right? So what other options do we have? Well, instead of this ugly dictionary, let's check out another kind of variable. We're going to put that up here, and it's called a class. We're going to call this class a dog. And we're just going to pass, just like that. Oop. So, when we call this class, it's going to do nothing because we have no methods inside of the class. So your class can have variables, it can have functions. A class can contain just about anything that you want it to contain. It can even have other class members. So we could have a class that has a class, right? Like we could define another class in here. Right, these things could just kind of keep going on and on. We don't need to do that right now. Now Python is dynamic, right? So unlike statically typed languages like Java or C or something like that, we can stop right here with our class. This is all we would have to do to have a basic variable for dogs, right? So let's add some other methods. We'll come back to this dog class in just a few minutes. So a minute ago, in our dog dictionary, we had a dog name, right? So we want to get the dog name. So we're going to return raw input. Enter dog name. Okay. And let's get another one for dog age. And we had, let's do a get breed. Okay. I mean, we could keep adding more and more of these if we want, but I think this is enough for now, right? So we're going to start off with the number of dogs. Then we're going to get the name, age, and breed. Okay. So we've got our number of dogs. And now we know this is going to be an integer because we're going to be returning an integer, or the program's going to fail whenever you put in a string. So how do we create a bunch of dog objects? So let's go back up here to our class. It's just a basic class. And we want to call all these functions over and over again, right? Because we don't want to keep typing enter dog breed. If we're going to do this 10 times or 5 times, we don't want to type that out each time, right? So let's do another loop. In number of dogs, let's go with dog. Hang on. So for dog in number of dogs, we're going to create a dog object. So the very first thing that our loop is going to do is create a new dog. Let's rename that to X. We'll rename this to dog. There we go. We're going to create a new dog object. And we're going to set dog.name equals get dog name. And then we're going to do dog.age get dog age. Then dog.breed, get dog breed. Right? And then the very last thing we want to do is we'll have a dog list. Empty list. And we want to add each dog to the dog list. And so at the end, we'll have a list of dog objects. And we'll print that out and see what that looks like. Alright. Oh, yeah. We'll see how this is wrong. So how many dogs do we have? Well, I don't want to type a whole bunch. We'll just go with 3. Uh-oh. Int object is not iterable. So you can't iterate over a number because there's only one. So what we need to do is have a range. And before we do that, let's see. Because I'm pretty sure if we print the range, that's not going to give us what we want. We're going to have to do a little math. Right? It's probably going to tell us whatever our number is. Well, let's see. So if we have 3, 0, 1, 2. Fancy. Does exactly what we want. Also, there's either range or X range. Range is fine for us here because of what we're doing, but X range is probably what you'd rather be using. You can run into problems if your number gets too big in range, but for what we're doing, it doesn't matter. Alright, so let's try that again. How many dogs do we have? 3. Enter the dog name. Go with Max. Dog age, 18 months. Dog breed, Bull Mastiff. Next dog, Oreo. Oreo's 5. And Oreo is a mutt. How's that sound? Dog name, Fluffy. This one was 8. And the breed was unknown. Alright. That's weird. So we have dog object dog object, dog object. So we have 3 dog objects in our dog list. Now, how do we use that? Well, we know we have a list, so let's loop through that list. So for dog, in dog list, let's print the dog's name, the age, and the breed. So we have dog.name, dog.age, and dog.breed. Well, let's see what happens. So we have 3 dogs. Max, 18. Mastiff, Oreo, 5. Mutt, Fluffy, 8. Unknown. And there we go. So here's what we entered. And now, there's what we printed. Fantastic. So this dog object is certainly a lot cleaner than that big hairy dictionary we had when we first started off. And it's much easier to access these variable names. We can define them on the fly. And because we extended object, so let's talk about what happened here. So we have a class. Same way we do a function down here, we define it, but up here we're going to tell it it's a class. The name of it is dog, and in here, this is how we can extend something else. I forget what version of Python that this object is just, it's a built-in, it just happens automatically, you don't have to define it. For sure in Python 3, and maybe it was 2.7, I don't remember. But you might see this in older Python code that you run across where it extends object because that wasn't default behavior. And by doing it, we can look at what object is, right? So here in PyCharm, this is the reason I use an IDE, because we can just jump straight into the way other code is defined. By extending objects, all of these functions, as we can see, those are automatically defined for us, so we don't have to define them. And so this one, this set adder, this is what lets us do the dog.name, dog.breed, dog.age, whatever, without having to worry about it, right? Because it just happens for us magically because of this. Right. And then we have this built-in pass, which means do nothing, create an instance of it, and just do nothing. Right? We could have additional methods in this function. We could override. Let's go back to that object. There it is. We can override these by defining these in our class. So if we don't like the way this behaves, we're certainly able to re-implement it in our own class over here. We don't need to do that. But sometimes you have to. So, once we get to here, this is where we create a new instance of that dog object. We're like, hey, I need a new fresh version of dog. And then we define each one of those variables. Then we set it to our name, age, and breed. Then once we're done doing that, we take our dog list and we append each dog to the list. And then just for giggles, we print out that information. But that's going to wrap this little lesson up. Maybe we'll pick up again tomorrow, see if we can take this dog thing a little further. Maybe we'll start storing this information in a database, make some kind of dog inventory tracker, and then eventually we'll throw a web interface on that so that we can expose this to other users, and we can keep track of our dogs, right? But thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you'll check out the next video where we pick up where we were leaving off tonight. Thanks.